let's go ahead and dive right in. First off, the presentation that we're looking at today is based on this book, The Adult Learner. Okay, it's by Malcolm Knowles. It's been revised over the years, but a lot of these ideas that started off with him quite a few years ago, they've just been revamped and developed over the course of the last about 40 years. So, with that, let's start with this idea of human learning. If you want to switch over to your first page, it's got that photo. Looking at the photo for just a moment, what do you see? Who do you see? Okay, maybe your old lady, your young lady. Okay, which one did you see first? Okay, some saw young, some saw old, both. Some people are ambidextrous. Okay, so this is that idea of perception. There's this idea that you're interpreting what you're seeing based upon what you have had experience with, correct? So with that, it's kind of one of those things to think about when we're working with students, is that schema that students have over the course of their years in school, learning. They develop this way of perceiving information. So the next thing I'd like you to do, flip the page, real quick, write down the directions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. How do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Those are 2 minutes. Spoon.
You don't know how to make a peanut butter sandwich. Put it on the peanut butter.
We did. We did it in our
One more minute.
I am.
Okay, so anybody want to share with me their directions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Now, I'm not actually going to make it, but we're going to look at the concept behind it.
So, I don't like my bread to get soggy. So, I spread a very thin layer of peanut butter on both slices of bread.
Okay.
And then I put honey on mine. So then I put honey in the butter and push them together.
Okay. So how do I do that? Tell me what to do.
I am presupposing that you have basic vision.
Okay. But let's go with what was your first line of direction?
Get out 2 slices of bread.
Okay.
And
So I have to.
I'm presupposing basic kitchen skills. So
But
yeah.
see what I'm getting at here, right? You know, it's a lot of times we have students that we make assumptions for, right? And they may not have that basic skill. So you say, get out 2 pieces of bread. What would I have to do before getting out 2 pieces of bread?
Tear the bag open from the side.
Tear the bag open from the side. I'm not going to ruin Randy's
You may
stuff.
remove the twist tie by twisting the opposite ends in a way that doesn't come back.
Okay, so.
First, you need to wash your hands.
Okay, right? So kind of like going at it that way, because there's times, I mean, we're instructors, we teach, we're working with students, and there's a lot of assumptions. I mean, being a math instructor, there's a lot of assumptions that I know I make a lot of times. And when you're working with students, all of a sudden you hit a roadblock and you have to realize what? We got to come back to how they're perceiving information and make sure that the instructions are giving them actually flow in a way that logistically makes sense to them, right? Starting with washing your hands, right? Very basic skill set. Granted, sometimes the diagnoses that we do can determine that, okay, they're past that. And that would be where some of our assumptions can come in. So, general thoughts on how humans learn. how humans learn would be what? What's an idea?
Everybody learns differently.
Everybody learns differently, I would agree. Repetition,
Different ways of taking in information.
different ways of taking in information.
Mimicking or like an apprentice kind of.
Okay, okay, perfect. So that idea of like the repetition, mimic, how do you do it to tie your shoes? You didn't just one day, oh, got it, when you use Velcro. I mean, that's the easy one. But you had to do what? Repetitiveness. You had to see somebody do it, right? Okay, so let's, I'm not going to do question number 2. So let's talk about learning versus education real quick. Okay, because there is a difference. Do you want to flip the page? So I'm not going to read the definition, you guys can read that. But under emphasis, if you guys could underline learner, because in learning, it's the learner that's important. Okay, it's where the learner is where the change happens. It happens internally to them. Okay, so that's the learning. The learning that happens when the change occurs in the person. Okay, and it's this idea of moving information from working memory to long-term memory. If you think about it, like kind of a rudimentary way of thinking about it would be like a computer system. You have your random access memory, you have a lot of details going on in there. If you hit the save button on your Microsoft Word document, it gets transferred into long-term memory. Okay, just a simple way of thinking about it. So let's do a little exercise on working memory and long-term memory. So cell phone numbers. Go ahead on that first line there. Go ahead and just write down your cell phone number.
You don't have that.
Okay, now I'm going to read you a number. Okay, don't write it down until after I've read it. 568-3214. Write it down. The second number, 801-215-6874. Write it down.
Sorry. Yeah, I forgot the first one.
And the third number, 228-625-4523. Write it down. Okay, so those were the numbers. Whatever you have on your page, just leave it there. When you were thinking about your phone number, how are you thinking about it? Were you thinking about 8, then a 0, then a 1, okay? And then the rest of the digits. You were thinking it in terms of a cluster of information, what we would call chunking. You're looking at it more as just one big unit of information, right? But the next one, when I gave you all these new numbers, just randomized, 5, 6, 8, and then 3, 2, and 1, and 4. Those are bits of information. How many of you felt like you memorized, you heard that one, able to write it down pretty easily? Yeah, right? About 7 numbers. When we got to the next one, 801, we've all heard that, so that's actually, in and of itself, that's a chunk of information. And then the rest of it, because it's new numbers, all individual pieces of information. How many of you felt like that one was fairly easy to get down? Okay. And then we go to this last one, where it's all new, unless you're from the 228 area code. All new information, right? How many of you were able to get that one down all the way? Okay, good, right? And notice, for some people, right, they can hold that information for a little bit longer. But it's that transfer of information over. So chunking is this idea of grouping information in a meaningful way. And this is where it starts getting a little bit more important for us as instructors, working with our students. You can have, students who know a good amount of stuff, they chunk in large groupings, right? It's like moving a dump truck. They can move a lot of information. But when we're learning something new, how effective are we at moving large chunks of information? A lot of times not as effective, right? We move smaller bits. So when thinking about our programs, how much information are we trying to transmit at any one time? And how well are our students moving that information from working to long term? Okay? First off, it has to make sense to them, it has to be meaningful, right? So, on this next round of working memory activity, this one gets a little more fun. There is math in here, Rex.
I do.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the slide. There's going to be a small equation. It's going to be like 3 times 2 plus 7 equals 15. In your head, you go, yes, it's true, no, it's not. And then I'm going to have you all say the word that comes after it. Your ultimate goal is going to be to write down all the words. But don't do that until we go through all of the information. Okay? You ready? Oops, wrong direction. Okay, do the equation. Think in your head, yes or no. Everybody say the word fruit. Do the equation. Yes or no. Everybody say the word road. Do the equation. Yes or no. Do say the word green. Do the equation. Yes or no. Say the word flower. Do the equation. Yes or no. Say the word paper. Okay, write the words down.
Hello, paper with glasses.
Not the yes or
Not the yes or no's, yeah. Why?
no. Why would I focus on that?
Okay. Another 10 seconds.
Use all available resources now.
We'll put it in.
All right, so those were the words. How many of you, how many of you had fruit? Yeah, everybody. How many of you had paper? Everybody. How about road? Green, tower. Okay. Notice 100% of everybody got these two. In the middle, it kind of bumped around a little bit. And that's just the way learning happens. You're going to learn the most at the beginning and the most at the end. Everything in that middle section, that kind of gets lost. And that kind of goes back to how, you know, and we'll look at this a little bit later on in the presentation, if we get there. But what it does is, your mind is focused on that new content knowledge. That middle section is where we try to get them to master content. And then the end is where we have them do what? Show the mastery. So then all the next learning grouping happens there. Okay, but in terms of working memory, I was having you compute, say a word and try to memorize the word while doing computation. There's only so much your brain can handle and still be able to move things into that long-term memory for later recovery. Okay? And that's for everybody. So, in education, looking at that one, the emphasis is on the educator. If you want to underline educator. You as the educator in education, pushing forward what you want your students to learn, you're creating the stimulus so that the learner can create the internal change. Okay? So the stimulus that you develop to create that change has to be meaningful and has to be chunked in the right sizes so that our students retain that information and move it into long-term memory. Okay? So let's rate your confidence real fast. If you look towards the bottom there, it says rate your confidence on a scale of 1 to 10. If you saw something 10 times in a row, repetition, you saw it 10 times in a row, circle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which one you think. How well would you remember that? 100%, 10, 1%, or 10%, 1, excuse me. Okay, if you saw that 100 times, rate your confidence level. If you saw it 1,000 times, rate your confidence level. Okay, you ready? So which one's the real penny?
No.
You flip the page over, you'll see that. So circle the real penny. Okay. Still 1 more minute, 30 more seconds. Still 30 more seconds. Okay, have you decided? Okay. Which one do you think is the real penny?
No.
A.
It's actually A.
I got it right.
Say it.
One second.
Oh, it is?
Actually, what they did, in some of these, they just reversed, they mirror imaged them.
No, but the word 1
1
cent.
cent.
But 1 cent, yeah,
It's
they,
on the reverse, it's on the back side of the video.
that's the front side.
It's there somewhere.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
So we all went to that.
Yeah. So, but how many times have you seen a penny, right? Thousands of times we've seen these pennies. And yet, because it wasn't done in a meaningful way, none of us really remembered what a real penny looked like. Okay, so it kind of goes back to that idea of those meaningful chunk sizes for our students so that we can push them forward. Okay, and move things from their work into their long term. Okay. All right, I'm going to skip the TPQs. Let's talk about theories. I'm going to go through this real quick. Essentially, these are the definitions of a theory. It's just a basic core belief system on how something that you think something needs to be performed. Okay, which is why you have theories of pedagogy, theories of andragogy, theory of teaching, theory of adult learning, theory of gravity, right? Which could also be a law of gravity. But in essence, a theory explains why a law is just that, and this is what happens. Okay, so laws of learning. Students perceiving things, they're remembering things, they're sensing things. Okay, so you can read that on your paper there. So with that, let's look at pedagogy real fast. Okay, pedagogy. If you go back to its Greek meanings, okay, this is again coming from the adult learner book here. But it basically, or excuse me, literally means the art and science of teaching kids. Okay, that's its literal meaning, translation. So. A set of beliefs, a theory, that we would use to explain why kids learn the way in which they do. But let's look at a little bit of history, and this is basic history of this. So you start off in the 7th and 12th centuries, you're talking Europe, you have a large religious entity, and they start teaching a lot of the young men how to be in the clergy. So we get this set of guidelines that we start to utilize, right? And then as time goes on, we move into the 19th century, we have our secular and our public schools start to pop up a little bit more organized, but out of what learning style are we functioning off of? Teaching kids, teaching young men in the clergy to be part of the clergy. So you got this idea being pulled through, so you get this pedagogical model that gets frozen in the thought process of how we do our teaching structures. Now obviously there's more to this, but this is just a general idea, okay? From here, you have World War II finishes. We want to start teaching our adults how to perform tasks a little bit better. But what's the only model that we know at this point? Yeah, 7th to 12th century pedagogical models of teaching the kids. So what happens is, we're taught like kids. How many of you have gone to a course at a university and you're just like, okay, I'd like to do something now, right? And you feel like, just let me do something, right? Kind of like what we're doing right here. Let us do something, okay? So what happens here, though, is that the learner turns into more of a submissive role where they're just sitting and accepting information versus actively engaging. And that's why you're seeing a lot of change right now in our K-12 system, right? You hear a lot of constructivist approaches. We want the kids to be more involved because there are times when andragogical principles work really well in a setting with kids, and vice versa. Sometimes pedagogical settings work better in an adult learning setting. It's just when you use which one, okay? So andragogy, adult learning. All right, so we got 4 definitions here of what an adult actually is. So if you want to flip your page over. You have your biological definition. You know, if you think about how we classify all other animals, it's when they're ready to reproduce. That's adulthood. If you go to a legal definition, that's when they can vote, we have some legal rights, we go from there. Then you have your social definition when they take on the roles of what we expect adulthood to be. Now obviously this changes depending on what culture you're in, right? But what we're going to focus on, if you want to put a star by that one, is the psychological definition. Okay? It's when the adult arrives at a self-concept of being responsible for their own lives and they're being self-directed. They take on the responsibility. They basically say, I don't need you as a teacher, I need you more as a facilitator and consultant. I will take care of this. I will move myself forward. That's the type of situation which leads us to the student-driven learning, right? Where the student's driving it, which is what we experience here every day. Our students come in, they say we're going to do this, and they move themselves forward, and we help them move along, right? The next page, I found this graph to be quite interesting. So there's a natural tendency for independence and a cultural tendency for independence, or what they're calling degree of dependency. Obviously in infancy, high dependency level, right? We gotta feed them, we gotta make them change their diapers and all that stuff, right? Very dependent. As time goes on though, we're noticing a pretty decently steep curve up into their adolescence years where they're wanting more of that independency. They want to be on their own. They want to take responsibility, but culturally, what are we doing to them? We're keeping them from it, just on a cultural level, okay? So we've got these kids who want to take control. We're saying in the classroom environment, no, not so much. And then that trend continues on into the adulthood, wherever that is, okay? So now think back to your personal classroom, so the students you've dealt with, where you're wanting them to be in this andragogical area, this self-directedness, and yet they need a lot of, they're very dependent. You gotta really walk them through, right? So now we've got this issue of, oh, how do you move them from a pedagogical over to an andragogical mindset, pretty much? How do you take them from dependent to independent? And that becomes part of the challenge that we have as instructors in those higher education settings. So let's look at this in a little more detail. Circle the andragogical model on that right below. That's the information that we want to go over. But as a comparison, you can see that in a pedagogical model, students, think about yourself. Go back to your K-12 years. Teacher's teaching something and you're learning what you need to know to pass the, that's it. That's all I want. Just what do I need to know? Let me move on. The learner self-concept is dependent upon you as the instructor. They're dependent upon you, they're trying to figure out who they are, but they're working with you on that. They rely on you. The role of their experience. Honestly, I teaching 5th grade, my 5th graders had very little experience. So their experience had very little worth in their education process. There was some worth, but not a lot. The readiness to learn, when I tell you, we're doing social studies. Get out your book. That's how it worked. Orientation to learning, subject-centered, very subject-centered. I'm learning this right now. It kind of ties back into only what I need to know, but I'm learning it in math, or I'm learning it in social studies, or I'm learning it in English. Very subject-centered, very focused. Motivation, external, candy, 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 candy. Right? That's how we get them going. Then you look at the andragogical model and it changes, right? And we're pulling students from here to here, and now it's a question of why do I need to know this? What's the purpose? Give me some explanation. Okay? Well, just tell me to do something if you say so. Let me know. Learner self-concept. Now they're going to be responsible for their own decisions. They're going to actually take control of that. They're going to say, yeah, I want to do this because this is how I want to lead my life. The role of experience, there's a lot more behind them now as a resource. Some of our people work in industry and they come in. So there's a lot there. And we can't dismiss that. Readiness to learn, it's all about real life situations now. It's all about how this is going to affect their future, their livelihood. That's why it's life-centered, and most of it's intrinsic now, internal. Sometimes it's external, pay raise. But a lot of times, it's about maybe a better life, maybe they want to make more money, things like that. Or they just like learning. So, learners need to know. I'm going to move through this section fairly quickly. Okay. But the learners need to know, here's some questions that we, like maybe in our orientations, we might want to throw out there with our students, but a lot of them, how is learning going to be conducted? What learning is going to occur? And why the learning is actually important. Remember, learning is that internal change, not the activity that we're going to have them do. So that's the tough part here. It's the internal change that we want from the student, not the activity we're going to have them do. Because the activity is the education. What learning, what learning What learning? What is going to make that internal change for me? Well, I can tell you you're going to read this book. Okay, well that's the stimulus, right? That's the activity that you're going to do. How are you going to get that learned? Tougher question, right? And I don't have an answer. It's a good topic for discussion. But self-directed. Self-teaching, we see that. But more importantly is this autonomy. So if you want to underline personal autonomy, it's about taking control of the goals and purposes of learning and assuming ownership of that learning. Okay, it's that autonomous capability that we want our students to get to. If you look at Grove's stages of learning autonomy, you've got these 4 stages. Think about the stage that we're in right now, okay? You as a student, where do you feel you're at? And how does that affect where I'm at? Interesting, right? Because if you look at what I'm doing right now, I'm doing this, which would entail that you should be here, dependent. But how many of you might be more interested? And how many of you actually are being a little bit involved because we're doing stuff? So I'm functioning on stage 1, but you might be functioning on stage 3. Creates an issue, right? It might be why some of the first when you get some students get frustrated. You know, like, dude, let me do my thing. Stop doing this. Let me do this. You just consult me. Give me some direction.
I understand there's a similar concept of leadership in general.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, expand on that for a second.
I only kind of learned the precursory idea, but the idea is if someone's really not that motivated and doesn't really know what they're doing, you kind of pretty much have to direct them on pretty much anything. If they know what they're doing, they're self-interested, then you can pretty much just guide them a little bit, let them do most work. If there's someone between, you might also be between.
There you go, right? So it's determining, right? So it's that kind of idea of, all right, are we when we do those initial competencies, are we determining their knowledge competency, where they're at motivationally, what are we looking for, right? And every program is going to do something different, okay? But something to keep in mind here, right? And these are just some examples of what happens in those general stages, okay? Now these are not law, these are concepts, okay? All right, now the role of experience. So the role of experience, you have a wide range of differences, much richer resource for learning. Underline this one, and circle bias. So I'm going to create biases that can inhibit or shape new learning. Okay, go back to the perception activity that we did at the very beginning. You already had a preconceived bias of how you're going to interpret that particular photo. So that bias either created a hold, like for those of you who saw the young woman first and they said, okay, now look for the old woman. There's an inhibition there, right? I can't quite see it. There's something holding that back. But for some of you, you might have gone, oh yeah, I can now see that. So now we just shape new learning based upon a preconceived bias that you have. So what biases do your students have when they come in? That is either keeping them from learning something new or helping them shape new learning, internal changes, right? Go to math. How many of you have a preconceived bias based upon your personal experience in mathematics that more often than not that actually inhibits your ability to remember or learn the mathematical principle? Okay? On average, we see more of this than we see of this in a math classroom, just because of the experience that's been had. Okay? Something to keep in mind. And then obviously, it provides ground for adult self-identity. So we have to be respectful of the experience because that is how they have defined who they are. Okay? If you come in and say, I had a bad experience in math, you know, and just blow it off, I've just devalued who they are. Okay? So we have to come at them from where they're at. Okay? So single loop learning and double loop learning. All right? These are just terms, but put a star next to double loop learning. Essentially, what we do when students come in here is we have them on a double loop learning cycle. and that means that they're